So Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre III is about a new chainsaw family, different from the first one and the second one, versus Kate Hodge and William Butler. And lots of carnage ensues, and you have a heavy metal soundtrack. And by that, you have a heavy metal Leatherface.
Hello, and welcome back to Scream Addicts. I'm Jinx, your host, and that was Heather Buckley talking about Jeff Burr's 1990 horror sequel, Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre III. Ms. Buckley is a film journalist, award-winning FX shop supervisor, and Rondo Award-winning producer whose latest film, The Ranger, is currently in post-production. Ms. Buckley, thanks so much for being on the show.
I'm so happy to be on your show. And a shout out to Jerry Smith, who tagged me on Twitter about the one of the people in the world that could talk about Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3.
I joked before on the show, but now I'm starting to think that it's true that Jerry is essentially the official booking agent for Scream Addicts. He's sort of wrangled in a number of different people that I think he would enjoy listening to on the show, and as a result, I enjoy talking to. So yeah, thanks, Jerry, if you're out there listening. So I got to ask, we begin every episode by asking our guests why they chose the movie they did to talk about. So out of any horror movie you might have gone with, why Leatherface?
I joke and then I not joke that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 is my favorite horror film of all time. It is incredibly important to me because chainsaw itself is fundamental structure of genre. I was just at the Alamo Drafthouse in Yonkers giving an intro to the original, the 74 one and 35. And I mentioned there that this film, without it transformed modern horror genre. The intensity of it, the simplicity of it. When I watch it, it's almost like a miracle. But I didn't come across Chainsaw because I saw them all out of order. I saw 2, and I fell in love with Leatherface and the family. And my sister and I would quote incessantly from this film. And I was reading Gore Zone at the time because I actually started with Gore Zone magazine. I started with 9, and then when I was at 11, Leatherface was on the cover, and I went, Leatherface? My love is on the cover of Gore Zone. They're making another chainsaw film. And it's also the gateway that introduced me to Fangoria. Because when I was looking at the Leatherface because just a Gore Zone reader, didn't ever pick up a Fangoria, looking at the Gore Zone magazine. And then when I turned like just a half inch, I go, what is this magazine called Fangoria that also has Leatherface on the cover? And it just blew my mind when I was around like 13 years old that there's another Leatherface film. So to me, it's what surrounds the film because chainsaw is so important, and it's just how this chainsaw family is made, what Leatherface looks like. That's the first chainsaw I saw in the theater with my father and with my sister. I have the Distortions 3 chainsaw mask. I was Leatherface for Halloween, like most chicks my age. I was, because I had long brown hair. Like I have a punk bihawk now, but I had long brown hair, and I wear the whole outfit, and I even took the fake blood and sort of put it on the mask. Because there's a scene, some of the publicity stills is kind of on his face, like the hitchhiker's birthmark.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of reasons. There's not one succinct reason why. I have great affection. When I was watching the first Chainsaw, I posted on social media that it's as if I'm watching someone that I'm in love with. And I feel that way about 2, which I own on 35 millimeter.
Do you really?
And I do. And I also have a lot of the behind the scenes actual negatives of making of Chainsaw 2.
Oh my God.
And they're on the Arrow release because I do a lot of work with Mike Felser, who's also a huge Chainsaw fan. And one of my dreams, because it's not on Blu-ray yet, and I know they don't go out of it's very in-house New Line Cinema when they do their discs, but if they could find it in their heart to let me do the extras if 3 ever comes out on Blu-ray. I've also tracked down, I bugged Randy from NECA, when am I getting my Part 3 Leatherface? And it's finally out there. They've designed it. I saw it at Toy Fair, but it's not out to buy yet. So there's a lot of stuff of my obsession around Chainsaw. It's kind of like a crazy wild bee's nest of why this girl loves Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. But there's so many reasons. There's so many aspects. There are dimensions to my obsession and fascination with it. I mean, that entire series, because I love 1 through 4, I have a very deep affinity towards ensemble films and ensemble films with character actors. And out of any genre franchise, that's like the Robert Altman is the Chainsaw series, because it's like, let's get some great dialogue and a bunch of character actors. Because Leatherface in that movie, it's like he's not like everyone's, not really fancy, and then you have Jason. Halloween was a little different. Everybody seemed like on an even playing field. The characters were really, really well written. But like in Leatherface, it's like he slightly more important than like in the first one. He's just such an iconic presence. And then in two, I mean, it's hard to say, because it's also about the people that surround him, the villainous characters that surround him. I mean, we can even say villain, his family.
And even the heroes. I mean, Lefty is almost as crazy as he is by the end.
Well, I mean, because they're Texas people, and I was working on a documentary about Chainsaw 2 because of my images, and I tried for years to get Toby to say yes to this project, and when we ran out the clock to get his participation, but I just his loss that we've lost him, it really hit me, because I just think of a world where the Chainsaw family, Leatherface, all that stuff, that didn't exist, and to me it's very heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's been a rough year to be a horror fan. It really has, and his passing definitely hurt quite a bit. That's why it seemed like kind of so perfect that you chose this movie. It's funny that we should be talking about Leatherface right now, because Tobe Hooper did just pass away, and we're also getting a brand new Texas Chainsaw film in the next month or so, which is also called Leatherface. And I'm so glad to hear that you love this movie so much, because I love it too, but it seems to me like I don't know. It feels like, I know the movie has its fans, but it almost feels like Leatherface is kind of this near invisible entry in the franchise. It isn't the worst entry in the franchise. I think most people would agree with that. And, I think a lot of people, by and large would say that it's not necessarily the best in the franchise. And it didn't make the biggest splash or have the same sort of release that, say, the Platinum Dunes films had. But it just feels a little underloved, in my opinion. And I don't know. Would you agree that fans should definitely maybe give this film another look and reconsider it? It feels like it's time to reappraise Leatherface, and it's time for that big special edition Blu-ray to be put out, and for people to give it another shot. I think the love of Leatherface is, I mean, I don't meet too many people that are in love with Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, and I've been around horror world. I mean, we're really three. All right, so the first one, Chainsaw, comes out in Cannes, bought in 3 days. It's at the Museum of Modern Art. Respectable. Part 2 came out like right when canon was falling apart. People were not expecting such a horror comedy. I think in the years that's preceded it, though it hasn't reached Halloween 3 status of accepting that it's a great film, is sort of on their way. It's true that 3 is the invisible sequel, and I think a lot of people have not really revisited 90s horror. I mean, I was very young during the 90s, during the horror cycle, and you could still see most any titles in the theater in 35 millimeter. Just like when I saw Leatherface with my father and my sister, there were like 7 people in that theater, but I don't care. Like, those are the right 7 people to see Chainsaw. And I was already amped, because on MTV, Tom Kenny was on the set of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, talking to K&B, talking to Ari Mihailov. I have it on, because I waited next to my VCR, because I would record all this stuff from television, like when Hellraiser 3 came out and Doug Bradley was dressed as Pinhead in the red carpet in front of the Man's Chinese Theater. I have all that documented from when I was young. I remember having to do that myself, too. And if any listeners out there don't appreciate this, just keep in mind that back in the day, if you wanted to see any behind-the-scenes footage or trailers or anything, you couldn't just hop on the YouTube. Like, you had to wait for the programs to come on. And if you wanted to keep them, you would have to hover over that record button on your VCR and pray that you hit it quickly enough so that you got the entire thing.
It's very true. And I think as you because I was definitely a teenage pirate. And I would lock up the two VCRs. Like, it's like, oh my God, Evil Dead 2 letterbox unrated. And then I would make my family go to like all these video stores and put them together. And I have these mixtapes. So I do have the making of Chainsaw that was on TV on one of my VHS, because I still have my VHS. I never gave it away. And I have like a switcher DVD, VCR, analog TV setup, because though I produce Blu-rays, I do not have a flat screen or a Blu-ray player. It's true. So when I'm sitting and watching MTV, like the trailer, the Excalibur Chainsaw trailer comes on.
It's so good.
It's just wonderful. And I can't even, like, even to you, like, it's mysterious. And I would have to I'd have to go like deep into like my background and family dynamic, my complete obsession with the Chainsaw series. Because like my dad was like hunter, redneck. Always there was like animals he killed around the house that I would play with as a young girl, draw them. And then like I was this creepy child that would go and draw and look at my horror stuff and sort of like hide in my bedroom. So I think all that together starts creating an interest in this strange feral families. And when I was working on my Chainsaw 2 thing, is that I talked to Joe Bob Briggs about it, and he was fascinated because I'm from New Jersey, and he agreed it's like Jersey and Texas, so much in common. Weird backwoods people, rednecks, whole thing. Also, pride in the state that maybe you shouldn't be that prideful about. Because I was down the shore watching some shows play, and let me tell you, when you're in Asbury Park, it's like all the cars say Jersey Strong on it, all the t-shirts with the Jers on it. I was actually on the phone with the film commission in New Jersey, and they're also like, you want to shoot in Jersey, your phone number is like 732, and it's just something that's like, we enjoy that. And the stuff that I do, a lot of times when I have to call up talent or FX guys or VFX guys, they'll notice my 732 number and they'll just stop, like regardless of what kind of, it's like, wait, it's like, are you from New Jersey? And then it's just, they need to talk about Jersey. And when I go in LA, I hang out with the people who have moved from New Jersey to LA. So there's just, I think part of that is Jersey's kind of like Jersey grotesque, and Texas is Texas grotesque as well. So there's also that fascinating, because I loved reading Faulkner and the strange things that happen from these backwoods communities. So there's that layer of fascination in Chainsaw and 3, because you can't talk about 3 unless you got to talk about them all together, because it's a continuum. Maybe that's how we get people to appreciate 3, is that, to me, it's like 1 through 3 is a continuum. While 1 is very sacred to watch, it's very intense, and I think to receive that sacrament, you have to be in a certain mindset to enjoy Chainsaw. You need to be really focused on it, and it's very affecting. Number 2, Baroque, large, but like 3, I could just put 3 on as a background noise. I like looking at it. I like looking at the character actors. To me, it's something that it's also like my love of Ghoulies too. It's something that makes me so happy.
I agree. And it seems to perfectly capture like a certain time in horror that, again, you mentioned it. 90s horror, I think, hasn't really been revisited yet. It doesn't get the love that other decades have yet. And I think I think that time's coming. For the longest time, I think people sort of believed that the 90s was kind of like this wasteland for horror that wasn't sort of saved until Wes Craven did Scream, and that sort of revitalized the genre. But I mean, there are a lot of great films and in that decade, and Leatherface is certainly one of them. And it also, maybe it was growing up and being kind of young and, catching bits and pieces and glimpses of Leatherface before actually watching the entire movie. And just catching those glimpses would scare the hell out of me. Hell, the Excalibur teaser trailer would scare the hell out of me. I mean, here was this thing that looked kind of like a family drama. Then it kind of looked like maybe some sort of fantasy action film. And then Leatherface turns around and he's got a chainsaw. And I'm pretty sure I still carry the scars from that. But when it comes to 90s horror movies, there are some of them that feel kind of more dangerous than any of the movies you would expect coming out of the 80s. And this was around the time that there was sort of that splatterpunk aesthetic, in mostly books. I'm thinking of like the Skip Inspector books, or, the work of David J. Scout, who wrote Leatherface and coined that term, or even something like North Star Comics or Gore Shriek and the like. And I kind of appreciate Leatherface as being like this true splatterpunk kind of movie. And there aren't that many really that I can think of that do it so well.
Clive Barker's films.
Yeah. Definitely.
That's as close as you get to splatterpunk. But that, to me, it was a sacred time for me because, today everything's available. I could only, there's no way that I could have gotten a hold of, David Scout's books. And I tried, and I would go to, the little bookstores and the mall and Borders and try to find the splatterpunk stuff, and it was impossible. And sometimes I'd be able to get some of it in Douglas E. Winter's Prime Evil, things like that. Sometimes there was collections of books that I was able to sort of access that rock and roll horror energy that Leatherface has. But the 90s had Jacob's Ladder and Candyman and Silence of the Lambs. There's some good things that came from the 90s. There's also the struggle, and as a Fangorian, because I will always go back to that because it was so much of my life, is the hatred of the MPAA and Jack Valenti. This was a reason a lot of these films may have felt more dangerous, is because they were always on the precipice of getting gutted. Now there's no danger. Post-Saw, studios can put out whatever they want, be completely gory, nobody touches anything. But I think New Line Cinema and a lot of places like that, it's they were on people's radar of not being maybe as fancy as the giant studios. And maybe the MPA felt that they could pick on them more, because Leatherface was trimmed by the MPA, and just growing up, you would hear so much of your beloved movies. It's but I want to see the monsters. I want to see the gore. I want to see the violence. And they're sort of keeping that away from us. And now it's, films like Baskin.
Yeah.
Super Jodorowsky style gore, and then the entire underground horror film movement, with their crazy snuff gore cinema, just everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, you can walk into any horror convention and see sort of table setups with indie films that, I mean, the covers alone are worse than anything that was ever cut out of a movie in the 80s and 90s,
I think everyone was inspired by Cannibal Corpse covers, and then they made movies that are like Cannibal Corpse covers. That was always my theory.
Oh God, that is, yeah, I can totally kind of see that.
I think about these things a lot.
Well, you mentioned the first three movies being in sort of a continuum, but I'm wondering about, rewatching the movie, and I've always sort of wondered this, but anytime I revisit the movie, these thoughts, come back to me. I wonder about the continuity, because the movie opens with, yet another voiceover and a bit of scrolling text, which briefly sort of covers the events of the first movie. And then it tells us that Sally died in 1977, which is, it's kind of a bummer. But it also tells us that this, there was this family member who stood trial for the murders in that first film, and that's W.E. Sawyer. And I'm wondering, who the hell is W.E. Sawyer? Eventually, he's a character who pops up in, the Next Generation, which continuity-wise is even more of a mess, kind of. But I just wonder how it is that any one of the family members would have stood trial. And I kind of want to see that movie. I kind of want to see the Texas Chainsaw courtroom drama, But
that is a great idea. I have at my house Ed Gein's court transcripts as someone who's also ghoulish. It's signed by the judge. I think it was a birthday present or Christmas present given to me.
Okay, if we can go ahead.
My friends love me.
If we can pause the Leatherface chat for a second, because I'm borderline obsessed with Ed Gein. How did they come across something like that?
I think it was online or something, and also I'm fascinated with a true. And there's some, and I've done a podcast about that. There's some of us that are just, we live in shame because we're horror fans and true crime fans. And it's always looked down upon because it's this is what they say horror fans are. You're ghoulish. You watch this horrible stuff. So that's me. So I'm a bad representative of a genre fan. I am not upstanding citizen.
No. I would
So
say
I
you're
was
a great example of a genre fan because I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and I definitely felt that way in high school. I was the one kid in my class, maybe in the entire school. Okay, certainly in my entire school, who would carry around, Fangoria magazine in my Trapper Keeper. I was the one nerdy kid who loved both comic books and horror movies. And yeah, you're right. There was a little bit of a shame to that where it's like, until Scream came out, and then all of a sudden everybody was cool with horror. But that was only like the last couple of years of high school. It didn't really do me a whole hell of a lot of good for the preceding, God knows how many years. But now that we have social media, now that we have Twitter, now that horror is cool again or whatever, and you can kind of design your friend bases, when you go online. I mean, there never needs to be any shame for being a fan of anything anymore, I don't think, because you can just very easily kind of cut those people out of your life.
Oh, I'm specifically talking about horror fans that like true crime stuff. True crime, real gore, stuff like that. So I am on that spectrum. So my reading about like Ed Gein and Ted Bundy and Charles Manson, it's always been a big part of my personality and interest and fascination that it's almost like in Night of the Living Dead. It's like we are them and they are us. It's like they're human beings, but there's something so profoundly wrong with them, and I just can't help but to look at it, like looking at an existential void. It's hypnotizing to me. So that's why I was given the book, because my friend knows my interest in true crime stuff, and I think he just came across it on eBay. And yes, the full transcriptions. I keep it in my bedroom. It's right actually next to my bird cage filled with bones.
That's awesome.
Because there's a Robert Burns theme to my entire household and myself. Like I do like wear animal bones and stuff like that, and I call it being a chainsaw punk. Because it's like a much more feral cannibal punk. It's like, what if Pluto from Hills Have Eyes had a daughter who listened to the Sex Pistols? And that's kind of how I look when I dress. So it's like post-apocalyptic cannibal chainsaw punk.
That's awesome. And I can imagine there is a lot of crossover between horror fans and true crime fans. I mean, I can't imagine that a diehard horror fan wouldn't have at least a passing interest in true crime.
Some don't, and they're like dead set against it. Some of my friends are they're hardliners against that stuff. For me, because I also have the counterculture punk rock background, so I even approach genre in a very interesting way, because I would always look at the villain character, the anti-hero character, the other character. And a lot of the true crime stuff, it's sort of this mythology. It's creating these characters, looking at the myth of it, right? The myth of like Ed Gein, Manson, stuff like that, as entities that were so against society, truly antisocial, truly ripping down society's constructs, which is a little bit like punk rock.
Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes, I mean, the craziest thing about Ed Gein to me is not all of the horror that well, certainly all of the horror that the man wrought, but the fact that it was happening in the heartland. It was happening in Wisconsin. That fascinates me. And reading like the Harold Schechter book.
Yes.
About Gein, basically how he sets the stage for everything that was unveiled by presenting the town of Plainfield as being just, it was just any other town. It was just a normal place in the 1950s. And then all of a sudden, all these people realized that the nice, kindly, quiet man who would occasionally make gifts of venison to them, was in fact a monster. I'm fascinated by that. I have an equal fascination for stories like that I do with fiction. So
it's true, because he was just someone next door, but there's a little bit of that in Chainsaw, like the first one, because they are next door to Sally's parents' house, but a little bit down the ways, the Chainsaw house, the farmhouse.
Yeah. It's almost like they're hiding in plain sight, I think. Obviously they've probably kept Leatherface, behind locked doors for the most part, I would have to imagine, but there is that sort of veneer of, I don't know, normality to an extent, especially when it comes to the cook,
Chainsaw 2, they're underground, but then like Drayton is the figurehead that goes out in general population. And 3, it's Viggo Mortensen, who I think is kind of like the normal looking part of the family. He's almost like the Marilyn Munster of the family.
Oh, totally. Yeah, in a weird way, he's the siren. Who kind of, draws victims in, I think, or at least in this case, draws Michelle in a little bit. Yeah, and I think he's kind of fascinating, too, especially played by Mortensen, where he's kind of charming, but, there is that sort of undercurrent of menace to him from the very beginning. I don't know if they were trying to fully hide that or not, but, maybe we just don't quite pay attention to it that much because he's overshadowed by Alfredo, who's, like, inhaling the scenery with every line, but it feels like there's something a little bit off about Tex, even when we're meant to think that he's maybe a good guy and a hero at the very beginning.
Well, we're in a movie called Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of like hiding chainsaw families, hiding people's insanity, probably not the reason for that script. But yes, Alfredo. My sister and I love 2. Can quote every line from 2. We can also quote most of the lines from 3, and whose key dialogue that we quote all the time is Tom Everett's as Alfredo. He has such great dialogue in that film, and it's wild. And why is his name Alfredo?
Yeah, and the fact that he's like, he almost feels at times like Chop Top or The Hitchhiker on fast forward. Like, it's amazing sort of the stuff that he is spewing out at like a motor mouth kind of speed.
There's a great banter. I mean, if we had to compare these films to my, as I mentioned, like Altman, but things like The Dirty Dozen or like Kelly's Heroes, where you just give great dialogue to character actors to say. David J. Scow wrote some great dialogue for these guys, and they're all up for saying it because no one is above the crazy shit that they're asked to say. And it's just endlessly amusing to watch them deliver dialogue, wander around. It's one reason why I'm a huge Tarantino fan, because I just love actors reading great dialogue. It's like a radio play.
No, absolutely. It's like magic when you get like the connection between like the perfect actor with the perfect monologue, or, a couple of actors sort of riffing on dialogue with one another. I agree. I could watch that all day. Even, you mentioned Tarantino. His movies are great. I love them. I adore them. I love the plots. And yet at the same time, I could just watch his characters chat about nothing all day. I could listen to Jules and Vincent just talk, fast food burger chains for a couple of hours and be completely fine with that because they're so damned interesting. And I agree, like when you hear Alfredo talking, and sometimes it's very easy to miss some of the stuff that he's saying sort of under his breath at 90 miles an hour. And I got to say, some of his dialogue that appeared in the comic book adaptation, which are you aware? I mentioned North Star Comics earlier. They actually put out a 4-issue adaptation of Leatherface
My
in
friend,
Comic Book 4.
Who do you think you're talking to? I have the comic. I had the poster. I have it on VHS. I have it on DVD. I begged at my video store, Video Magic, to have like the VHS that's cracked open with Leatherface and the chainsaw coming out of there.
What?
And then in my house, I still have my Distortions Chainsaw 3 mask, which I mentioned because I was Leatherface for Halloween that year. But I have my Distortions 3 mask. So my friend, I do have the Leatherface comic. And my sister and I used to read it constantly.
It's amazing.
That's why there's some primal thing why the Buckley family and the Sawyers, there has to be something there that's deeper that maybe we could penetrate in this podcast, but I don't know what it is. But also my sister's love of Chainsaw. I was going to go back to 2 is that I have, and sometimes I would write about him in Fangoria, and he's on Facebook if you want to be his friend. When I was a little girl, my sister and I loved Chainsaw 2 so much, I named my Cabbage Patch Kid Nubbins because like it's a mishearing of Nubbins. And he's still around. But yeah, that's what we had. And then it took a while. One of my close friends told me, it's like, do you realize it's like Nubbins, your Nubbins is a doll baby, as is Nubbins in Chainsaw 2. Because they're playing, I never made that connection that they're both doll babies. So it's fascinating.
That is great. I love that. You're mentioning 2 again. It reminds me, the opening credits scroll of this movie, it mentions W.E. Sawyer. Do you feel like there is a continuity between Part 2 and Leatherface? Because on the one hand, if we're to take the opening credits scroll as, I don't know, a complete account of everything that's happened up until this point, then it sort of wipes 2 out of continuity in a way. But at the same time, Leatherface is called Texas Chainsaw Massacre III, and we do have that cameo with Carolyn Williams presumably playing Stretch again, at the very beginning of the movie. So I don't know, what are your feelings on that? Do you think that 2 and 3 exist within the same continuity? And if so, how do you account for that weird sort of ignoring of events from the previous movie at the very beginning of this one?
I always thought W.E. Sawyer was Drayton Sawyer. So that would be like Jim Cito's character had to go to jail and was captured in Nomland, where they were, the Texas kind of playground in 2. That's what I assumed happened in 3. I always had a slight fan theory, and it was very controversial. Sure, they're the Sawyers, but how do you know? Because I have this, we'll call this theory Chainsaw Family, and I've talked about it in front of a crowd. Kevin Mars, like, Kevin's geeked out. It's like, Heather, you need to talk about Chainsaw because Chainsaw is important for you. Talk about Tobe Hooper's work when you talk about. And I said, I need Chainsaw Family. So I feel a Chainsaw Family is a nuclear family, that they're sort of found people that are in common with you, people that love you, people who never leave. I mean, that's the reason why they keep corpses and stuff like that. And you can be as wild as insane, but they seem to have this great loyalty, like outsiders. There's an arts and crafts aspect to it. So I was wondering, like, in part 1 and 2, it's like, is that a family? Or are they just like, I've had aunts in my lives that aren't related to me? Or did they find each other? Because it just seems like the sequence as you move into 4, he keeps finding different cannibal families that are made up of like particular individuals. And I was just wondering, it's like, does Leatherface go from family to family and meet, and is it, because that's like, because again, my heart for Leatherface and Chainsaw, it's like he goes to a family, he's a misfit, he's so different than other people, and he goes there, he's accepted by family after family that all love him, that don't go, you're adopted, I don't love you, but there's a kindness that I see within that clan. So I never was like, this is a whole new family. It's like, well, this is another Chainsaw family that loves him and accepts him. And were they the original brothers in the first and second one, or were they just yet another family he found to be with, or did they all find each other? Because you can't tell in 3 or 4 that they're actually related. Are there just cannibal groups that come together?
I'd like to think so. And I think, remind me, is it in this movie or is it in the comic book adaptation? But I think there's this almost throwaway moment where one of the characters sort of comes across like a modem or a computer setup. And I wonder if it doesn't float the idea that that's how people like the Sawyers or people like the Chainsaw families, as it were, sort of keep in contact with one another. And that's kind of a terrifying idea. It's scary enough to think that there would be any family like the Sawyers living in the heart of Texas. But imagine if they're spread out throughout Texas or even throughout the country and they keep in contact. And I got to imagine that, taking care of Leatherface probably is trying at times, and maybe they just pass him from house to house, and he takes Grandpa with him. I don't know.
That's to me, I don't know if that horrifies you, but for me, it just makes like the Grinch, my heart grow 3 times as bigger. Because I tell people, Friday 13 Part 7 is the most handsome Jason Voorhees, the most handsome Leatherface is in 3. That's another reason why I love in 3. His design with his long hair, that mask, the leg brace, love it. Someone me who's a huge fan of Crash.
Oh my God, I just got that. I'm so dumb. It took me that long. Yeah. Oh God. Why did you remind me of the leg brace from Crash?
He's super hot. Again, heavy metal splatterpunk Leatherface. And it's true, because as I was thinking, we were talking about like, I love 1 because it's stripped back and I love punk rock. Number 2 is a little bit more, as I mentioned, Baroque. 3 is like you're stripping it back again, but in a different sort of way.
Yeah. I love the tone of the film. I love the atmosphere. I love I love the metalness of it in a way, and
I have it on cassette, that soundtrack.
Yeah, the fact that the movie ends with a song that eventually screams Leatherface at us,
So tacky.
I adore it. I adore it so much. I wish there had been more sequels like Leatherface, and I guess I kind of appreciate that each Texas Chainsaw, up to a point, they're all very different from one another. But at the same time, like I would like to imagine an alternate 1990s where we got maybe another 2 or 3 movies that felt like Leatherface,
Because it feels like a horror movie. It's a studio film. I know it killed Jeff Burr kind of to make it. If you watch the making of, and I've got to meet Jeff and tell him that Chainsaw 3 is my most favorite film ever.
Oh, that's awesome.
While I was in Chattanooga Film Fest, it's like, Jeff Burr, do you mean the director of Chainsaw 3?
And he is like, looking at his stuff too. I was looking back at his filmography. He did From a Whisper to a Scream, that anthology. He did Stepfather 2, which I think is actually a really solid sequel. He did, Puppet Masters 4 and 5. He did Pumpkinhead 2. He did Night of the Scarecrow. He had a pretty cool run of films there, and it kind of bums me out to look and see that he hasn't been making that many movies recently, and definitely not at the level that he used to. And I wonder what happened to his career where that stopped being an option for him or possible for him in a way, because I would like to see a brand new Jeff Burr studio horror movie. I would like to see what he could do with today's tools. I think he can make something very, very cool.
Well, I believe when I spoke to him, he had a lot of things that he was working on, and in the doc he mentions, he's independent filmmaker. To me, he's like a journeyman filmmaker. You give him the material, and he just comes up with some great stuff. Makes it happen.
Yeah, and too, I looking past Jeff Burr, I mean, this movie is written by, we mentioned David J. Scow, who, so far as screenplays go, he also wrote, Critters 3 and 4, which I think are a lot of fun. He wrote The Crow, which is one of my very favorite movies of all time. He eventually revisited the franchise with Texas Chainsaw The Beginning, which I was stunned at the amount of hate that movie caught when it came out, because to me, it kind of gave me everything that I wanted out of a Texas Chainsaw prequel that I didn't really want in the first place. I
consider those both to be Pleatherface, and they're both beautifully shot, the prequel and the remake. And again, I love the family aspect of it and the outsider aspect of it and all the production design that goes in it. It's just Leatherface is not Jason Voorhees, and it just seems a lot of these remakes are to remove that nuance, because the same thing with Rob Zombie's Halloween. Michael Myers is a giant juggernaut, and it's like, no, Jason Voorhees is a giant juggernaut. Maybe Rob Zombie should have remade Friday the 13th. That needs to be revisited.
I think Zombie...
I can't believe they got that wrong, because it's so simple, and yet...
Out of any of the major horror franchises that you could attach Rob Zombie to, I'm stunned that he has never done a Texas Chainsaw. Like, his aesthetic seems to be so perfectly Texas Chainsaw to me. I still kind of feel like House of a Thousand Corpses is his Texas Chainsaw in a way.
It's his Chainsaw too.
Yeah, oh, totally. I think somebody pointed this out on maybe a podcast or maybe an article I was reading somewhere, but somebody said that, if you basically marry like Spider Baby and Texas Chainsaw 2, then you have Rob Zombie's aesthetic. And it's like, well, yeah, that's kind of true. That's not a bad thing. I don't know if they were saying that to knock him, but I kind of would love to see an honest-to-goodness Texas Chainsaw movie directed by the man, because I think that could be kind of fascinating.
I would say no to that.
But you would watch it. You would be a little interested at least.
Anything that's a horror movie, I'll watch it. That's what people like. What is your? Because I know I say Chainsaw 3 is my favorite horror film, but it's like my favorite horror movie is horror movie. Like, you can't get me to watch anything else. You have to like what is it? Do I have time? I was like, oh, a horror movie. Well then, let's just put that on.
I'm much the same way. I gotta say, how do you feel about Rob Zombie overall? Do you just not want him to approach Texas Chainsaw, or are you maybe not an overall fan of his work, would you say?
Rob Zombie, I think, is an interesting director. He has an interesting taste. There's no doubt that he is not like he might be more of a horror fan than we are and have more knowledge about the genre than we are. I wouldn't put it past him. But there's a gap between the ability to know about horror and be a filmmaker. And he's sort of like in that world. Like his production design is good. His casting is a little bit too Monster Mania Chiller Convention for my taste sometimes. But I do appreciate that he gives a lot of the sort of like long lost character actors amazing parts. Because whatever I think about Lords of Salem, I don't think it really worked because there's no dramatic fall for the main character. But Meg Foster's performance is stunning and brave. Devil's Rejects is if he could do Chainsaw like he does Devil's Rejects and remove all these flares, flourishes, things that are distracting because the script isn't that strong. If he could do something like that, I would give him the Chainsaw franchise. And I know a lot of people hated 31, which is why I wanted to see it. And Mr. Jerry Smith is a big fan of 31, but it's like a slasher film with clowns.
Yeah,
I didn't hate it. It's very well made. And I've already worked on a slasher film with clowns. Right? The first movie that I did help with special effects on was Circus of the Dead.
Ah, very cool. I think Zombie's biggest problem, I think you mentioned it just a second ago, I love his eye. I think he has a good control of tone, like the atmosphere that he sets with each movie. I love the man's soundtracks. I love the music that he pulls together and the needle drops that he employs throughout each movie that he makes. I think time and time again, even with his best movie, Rejects, I think he's always fighting against his screenplays. I think his screenplays are always the worst things about his movies, whether the movies are good or bad.
He needs someone to probably write for him or help him write, and he needs to allow, and Tarantino suffers from this as well, allow the characters and the story to play out without interrupting it with the author.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Although I agree with you entirely, but at the same time, when Tarantino himself showed up as the narrator in Hateful Eight, I nearly choked. I was laughing so hard.
Well, that is wonderful. Oh, it's not literally show up in the film. It's like allow... Because he's then telling you that this Western exists in his universe, which is fine, and I loved when that was happening. But I would see some things that would happen in some of their films, like in House of a Thousand Corpses. It's like you would have this repetitive stuff that felt like a music video, and it's like I understand that those are tropes he likes and things that they like, but they're not helping move the story forward. Even though he likes it, and it's a darling that he's in love with, it's not doing service to the film. And when your particular obsessions, do not service the narrative in the film, you have to remove them, even though they're your favorite things. You have to remove them.
I agree. And
that's what I mean of the author getting in the way of the narrative a bit.
So far, Zombie aside, looking at the franchise and knowing that you're a huge fan of these movies, when we look at the first four, they're all quite different from one another. And then we have the Platinum Dunes movies, and then we have Texas Chainsaw 3D, and then the upcoming Leatherface, which I am really interested to see. I'm kind of fascinated by the setup of that, and I'm even more fascinated by the varying reviews for it. But moving beyond that, as a fan, where would you like to see the franchise go? What would you like to see out of the next Texas Chainsaw?
Such a hard question. I like with Seth Sherwood, who's the writer of, and I will say to the kids playing at home that he is a friend of mine, is that I'm dying to see that movie because I love that it's a period piece, and I love that it goes into the background of some of the characters. But what you said is very inspiring. It's like what about Drayton Sawyer? It's like I would love these films to be period films that focus on more on the characters. I mean, I wouldn't know what to do if someone gave me a Leatherface. I never even think about it. I just accept Leatherface exists in my life as my cinematic friend that lives in my head, and the family that if I ever met, that they would be very welcoming to me. That's how the franchise exists. It doesn't exist as something that I would think about what would be next or what their other stories are. But to me, it would always be a sense of play, just to know the family more. maybe in a period piece. Maybe get to know Drayton Sawyer's character more. I mean, I love Jim Siedo's performance. The more that I watch the first Chainsaw, the more I'm convinced that that is the performance of the film over, Gunnar's Leatherface and that beautiful mask, especially in 4K where you can really see the performances. But that's how the family exists to me. I don't know what I would do with them. I mean, Leatherface and I are always hanging outside the house. Maybe there's more cannibal families. I don't know. I don't relate to any of the franchise or any of the creatures in the film as something that I would want to see them do next.
Fair enough.
Just because they're internalized as part of myself.
Fair enough. Looking past Leatherface, then looking past the family, and I will say just before I ask this that I agree that the notion that the next movie is a period piece is interesting, and maybe even doing more like that might be interesting, because I think there's something about setting movies like this, or the movies having been previously set in modern times when it was even 74 or even the mid 80s, but the idea of events like this taking place decades ago, I think it's much easier to believe that a van full of kids could get swallowed up by the earth, that they could just disappear, or they could run afoul of somebody without having the world at their fingertips with a cell phone that they could call. And, plus, oh God, Texas Chainsaw 3D, I'll always be haunted by the FaceTime sequence in that. And I'm just like, I would just like to see all of that removed, and I would like to see the modern world removed from a story like that. And I think, we were talking about Rob Zombie a second ago. I think that's one of the things that I appreciated about 31 was that he set it in the 70s. And all of a sudden it was kind of believable to me again that a group of people could just go missing like that. And I don't know. I don't often get that feeling in modern movies. So, yeah, I'm rambling about that, by the way, and I'm sorry. But anyway, looking past Leatherface and the family, how do you feel about the other characters in Leatherface? I mean, we have Kate Hodges' Michelle, and we have William Butler's Ryan. And when we're introduced to them, they seem kind of different from the typical, protagonists that we've gotten up until this point in the franchise.
Well, in the first one, everybody remembers Marilyn Franklin as sort of the main protagonist in that. They're both, one's a survivor, one's fascinatingly annoying. These two, we have Stretch. She's her own dynamic. I mean, we wouldn't really meet Stretch in real life. She's a DJ. She's cool. Dennis Hopper's character works for the law. But this is sort of a return to what we consider a more typical slasher folk, in that they're everyday people. I mean, William Butler's character is pretty much the everyman, and Kate Hodge has more of an edge. I have the original Chainsaw 3 script, and it was a little bit different in that Hodge's character, her character was much more rock and roll and edgy, and she's the one driving the car. Yeah.
Huh, wow, I
believe Leatherface in Scow's original script is like wearing a leather jacket, which is just so fucking cool. You know what?
Oh, that would have been neat.
I would make a punk rock Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I've always wanted to take, when the Part 3 figure comes out, I want to put fake tattoos on him and have, round rock around his around, his neck area, like the New York hardcore boys, and just, knuckle tattoos. Because the next version, because punk rock, it looks very collagey, and we're always decorating our leathers, right? Leatherface can totally be punk rock. It could be like my version of Jubilee, but with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre series.
Leatherface wearing a leather jacket seems like such a no-brainer. I'm stunned that it hasn't happened.
I know.
Now, would it be actual leather, or would it be a skin jacket?
I think it'd be a combination, because you get your MC jacket. Maybe you took it off a victim, and then he's gonna decorate it with other things. Maybe he just sort of embroiders patches out of human beings and ears and stuff like that, and puts them on. He could do that.
I want to see this action figure. I want to see that movie now.
Right? That would be the punk rock Leatherface. So it would take place in the 80s, of course, and it's sort of like where Leatherface was at some point. Because if Chainsaw 2 takes place in the 80s and punk rock happened in the 80s, we're going to have to. So if that's Earth Prime, because that's what we're talking about. Because it's like Chainsaw 1 and 2 is probably Earth Prime. Actually, tonally, 1 and 3 make more sense. Tonally.
No, totally.
That they would be part of the same world. 2 is crazy. So it would be like Crisis on Infinite Leatherfaces. I'd have to make an alternative timeline where it's more like Return of the Living Dead Leatherface type of movie, which is fine because a lot of people are like, oh, what about continuity? I like in comic books that every Batman ever made, cinematically wise and on the TV, is every Batman. Because someone's trying to tell me it's like, oh, like the 60s Batman's not Batman. And it's like Bob Fingerman Batman. That's what it looked like. Totally. And it wasn't serious and it wasn't before, because we all love the Frank Miller stuff. Like when Frank Miller came in, or like when Alan Moore came with different series and made this stuff more adult and dark. We all love that.
But it feels like that's all we've gotten for the last nearly 30 years, though. It seems like once Tim Burton made his Batman, which I love Batman Returns even more, but it feels like from that point on, it's all just been Frank Miller. And some of it's been great, but I don't know. I kind of want a Neil Adams Batman movie already.
That is a wonderful idea. So in looking at that world, the comic world, where there are a lot of different iterations, the author sort of defines where the bat is. I think we could do that with Leatherface, make punk rock Leatherface. He would be better because I'm in love with him. He would match me much better when we're on the red carpet together.
Okay, so tell me, mid-'80s, punk rock Leatherface, chainsaw families. Does he
goes to New York City? No, he goes to urban environment.
I was going to say Jersey, just because.
He could go to Jersey. He could go hang out in the Pine Barrens. And then sometimes the family really cool. hangs out at CBGB's in the city. And he gets some punk rockers.
I think we started out kind of joking, but now I really, really want to see this movie.
And there might be like a cult of Chainsaw, because my dream, my fantasy is sort of to be accepted sort of by the family. So I don't know. Because it was interesting, their political beliefs. When I talked to Toby when I was at South by Southwest, I said that who is the villain of the film? And he felt that they're both sides of America. So it's not like one is the heroic side of America and one is not. He just, you had the hippies and then you had the cannibal family. I think the cannibal family is more libertarian than conservative. Like thinking about them, I think that's where they would sort of, well, I mean, because they are rednecks. They're out in the woods, but their politics, they seem to be devoid of, I mean, because they're anachronistic. They're almost anachronistic. They're out of time. They're out of place. The place is Texas. The place is rural, but nothing else is around them. They don't go to the supermarket. They eat human beings. I don't know. I don't know if they would, if they would be very nationalistic, as we see today. Because they don't care. They just care about, like, are you my family? Are you not my family? Are you meat? Are you not meat? It's very binary for them. It's a very simplistic way of life and being.
And even more terrifying, I think, as a result. I mean,
that's what would lead you into the capitalism of two. Oh, are you meat? Are you not meat? Because that's very capitalistic. I was thinking, like, if I had to do, because I need to, like, I own my third, like I mentioned, my print of Chainsaw 2, so it needs to play at some point in my life. I was thinking is that Part 2 and Dawn of the Dead together.
Oh.
That would be the double feature that makes sense. And in conversation, though, like, Chainsaw 2 was already steeped in the 80s when it was created, Dawn of the Dead predicted, like, Reaganomics and that kind of capitalism, because that was way before that really blossomed, the consumer culture. And they're both about consuming.
And I don't want to depress us both again, but we just lost both men who gave us those movies too, which again brings me back around to this being a really terrible year for horror fans. I mean, two guys who were kind of visionaries in their own right. And now, I don't know, I was just talking to somebody about this.
They changed modern genre. Where would we be without them? They're so important and so loved. And this is what I think about fan culture and conventions, that I don't know if they were embraced by cinema in general. Maybe they felt that they were sort of out of place in there. But all the fans that got to tell Toby and George that how much their work mean to them, how much they love them. I know Felser, I mentioned who I work for. It's like he spent all his time documenting Romero's career and a lot of Tobe Hooper stuff. The same with David Gregory, is that they had documentarians, they had fans, they got to meet their fans. I mean, I hope they died with like knowing how much they were loved and knowing how important they are. Because I know, like, after the fact, when everyone passes down, it's when all the fancy magazines, why Chainsaw is important, why Romero's important. It's like so critically important to cinema. And I will always preface that way. It's like important to us, genre filmmakers, but critically important to cinema.
Absolutely. And I wish, we didn't always wait to do retrospectives on, filmmakers' works like that until after they've passed. I think it's important to try and tell them what they mean while they're still here. And definitely, I mean, I unfortunately never got to meet Mr. Hooper, but I did meet George Romero at a convention once. And it was, as a fan who had loved Dawn of the Dead for years by that point, before I did meet him, it was amazing to see a line of hundreds and hundreds of people waiting to meet him and tell him what his work meant to them and have things for him to sign. And that was great to me, because I mean, I wouldn't say the genre was unfair to them, maybe just the business, but the fact that both guys seem to be to some extent struggling to get stuff made in the last decade or so, or decades of their career, it just seems so deeply unfair, because without one, we wouldn't have zombies. Without the other, we wouldn't have, I imagine all of the movies that have been made now about, a group of kids or a group of people running afoul of, an evil family out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, how many movies have there been like that now? And that all seems to stem from Chainsaw, I think, or at least its success. So I agree. I'm bummed that they perhaps didn't always have the opportunity to make what they wanted to in the last years, but also in those last years, I think I would hope that they knew that they were loved by all of their fans and that they had numerous fans that did love them.
I agree.
Can I ask, before we go, and I can't believe we're already at an hour, do you have any final parting thoughts on Leatherface?
I think everyone out there in TV land should give Leatherface Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 a try. I think before they watch it, they should probably look up splatterpunk, look at David J. Scow, and understand what milieu this movie is being created in. I want them to look at the career of Jeff Burr, and he seems like a lot of times he's handed these sequel projects, and he's always excelled at getting them done, getting great performances out of people. And just watching something from the 90s. Everyone needs, as I sit down and make everybody watch Paint Your Wagon, which is true, like people have to, and Ninth Configuration, Leatherface. It's great performances all around. Leatherface in any movie has not looked as great, and neither has his chainsaw. And it's endlessly repeatable, that dialogue. So get with the program. Leatherface 3, guys.
I agree. And I will say, we are long overdue for that Blu-ray. I hope that New Line gets off their ass and gives us a special edition that we need. And if they do, I hope that you do have a hand in the bonus features, because it's clear that I think you adore the movie more than anyone else. So it would only be fair, I think, for you to help deliver that. Yes. Well, thank you for having me on your podcast. It was wonderful. Hey, thank you so much for coming on, for choosing this movie to talk about. And can I ask, where can folks find you out online, and what can we keep an eye out for from you in the future? Well, they can friend me on all social media, because I'm not a snob that way. I'm going to be on Facebook, Heather Buckley. My URL is joe.spinell.lives. So they can find me there. I'm on Instagram as _ Heather Buckley. I'm on Twitter as _ Heather Buckley. And the new things that I've worked on, because I do a lot of stuff for Kino, it's like, if you guys are getting the Rawhead Rex disc, I put together all those extras. So Did you really? Yeah, I framed them out, and I set them all up. They were shot in England and Ireland and Germany, which is pretty cool.
Night Angel is going to come out soon. I believe those are both October releases. I'm excited this month, and it was a labor of love to get it done, the Long Riders disc, because I'm a big fan of Walter Hill and a big fan of Westerns. So that's up. And it has an interview that because I personally went out to LA to interview Walter Hill and Ry Cooder for it, and a lot of the brothers are on it, including Randy Quaid.
Oh, wow.
So those are some things that are out there in the world. And at some point I worked on some secret Synapse extras, which are in post at the moment. So that's going out into the world.
I always love Synapse. I love their stuff.
The Holy Man, Dame Jr., and that Suspiria restoration.
I can't wait.
Why hasn't he should be canonized? If not already, like he's already done so many things, but canonized.
It should have already happened, but if it doesn't after that movie hits Blu-ray, I mean, yeah, I agree. I cannot argue with that a bit.
And it took them forever, and it's like $50. It's like, yes, do you know how much time to go through Suspiria and make it beautiful?
I think that was the one release of theirs they've done recently for Steelbook where I didn't, and maybe I've just unfollowed all the right people or wrong people as the case was, but I didn't see any grousing about the price of the Suspiria disc. Tenebrae, yeah, Phenomena, sure, popcorn, people were...
You're buying a work of art.
Exactly, and I don't think...
The thing itself, the restoration is a work of art.
Let alone the steel case itself, which is beautiful, and all of the bonus features that are going to be on there. I can't wait. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much again for being on the show and for choosing Leatherface. It's a great movie, and more people need to give it a shot, and it was a blast chatting about it with you.
Awesome.
All right, and thanks to all you listeners out there. As always, make certain to like, subscribe, share, use the comments section, rate and review us on iTunes, and Scream at us on Facebook and Twitter. That's at Scream Addicts, and I am at Jinx1981. Until next time, folks, thanks so much, and have a great weekend.